So let's start with this idea of the time passes differently in the woods. Very
Mm.
creepy. That's a story out of Grimm's fairy tales, isn't it?
There is a bit of a fairy tale component to this book. I read a book by Barbara Comans called The Juniper Tree. At some point in the last couple of years, I was just sort of taking in all of these different books that felt frightening or scary, and that's a book that's very connected to fairy tale. And there's a lot of myth that also deals in the idea that the natural world has this intelligence and that you have to listen to that intelligence to understand how you as a person are situated inside of the world. Um, and it also, as a city dweller myself, it describes kind of my own uneasy relationship to nature. And part of the joke of this, because I also think it's worth pointing out that the book is, I hope anyway, funny, is that the place that I'm describing where they are is not the wild. It's not, there are places in this country, in Montana or West Virginia, that are really unpopulated and empty and quite frightening for that, if you're that kind of person, as I am. This is the suburbs. This is the suburbs of New York City. You can't walk 15 minutes without running into a house or a car or a person. So I wanted to just sort of turn that tension and make you feel that you, the reader, are walking through the woods in your bathing suit, unprotected from the elements, and that carries a real charge for me, I think.
Mm. But you also it's very ominous, isn't it? So you talk about the illness of the planet. We
Yeah.
don't see any of this bigger story directly, but you keep on dropping in little references to the fact that this is part of
Yeah.
something much more serious that's happening.
I think that describes for me my relationship to the very notion of climate change and what's happening on this planet. And I like to imagine that that's a pretty commonplace relationship or dynamic. We all understand that at this point in human history, something without precedent is taking place. And none of us really feels equipped to deal with that. So we do these small things, and I don't think those small things are unworthy, like no longer using plastic straws, for example. But that's not really dealing with the problem. It's not really dealing with the reality. And the truth is that unless you are the CEO of Exxon, you don't really have it within your power to do very much about what's happening. There's something really strange about that particular dynamic, and that seems to me the dynamic of contemporary life. And it's very hard to write about, and nobody wants to, I don't think, read a book that is going to be hectoring and didactic about your own responsibility to the planet. What I wanted to capture was simply this feeling of our relationship to the place where we are and how we have failed our responsibility to that place.
Mm. And one of the things that has struck me, I've been looking into the whole business of climate change fiction recently, and one of the things that struck me is what a challenge to our narrative structures, our familiar narrative structures it poses. Because what do you do when either you don't know what's coming, or you know that what's coming is so bad that what you're saying about it probably won't exist in the next 10 minutes.
I think that's right. I think if this novel attempts to capture the feeling of a novel of horror, what is more horrifying as the monster under the bed or the killer in the closet than the very planet breaking and becoming unrecognizable? And as you say, this has been fertile material in fiction for a long time. There are a lot of writers who've been thinking about this on the page, and I love the idea that anybody would sort of put my work in conversation with that body of work. But I think about a book like Amitav Ghosh's Gun Island is a wonderful book that talks about this. A lot of his work, in fact, he wrote a nonfiction book specifically about how the artist should think about what's happening to the planet.
That was the great derangement, in which he said that actually made this. He was saying the dominant narratives in Western fiction have precisely the same age range as the breakdown of the carbon structure of the world.
I
Therefore,
mean,
our story. Such a neat.
that's so chilling. And I'm so grateful that he has been thinking about this on the page. And, just last year, Jenny Awful published a book called Weather that I think really beautifully captures the individual psyche and its relationship to this huge uncertainty. Lydia Millett published a wonderful book called The Children's Bible also last year that is quite similar in some ways to my book, and sort of dramatizes in an almost fairy tale way the experience of these children navigating a world that is sort of changing very rapidly as the book progresses. It is out there. It is something that art is thinking about, and it is something that we as citizens of this planet ought to be thinking about more.
Mm. So you have this unfolding mega story sort of floating around in the background, but what is actually happening to these characters is something very immediate. It's happening now, and it involves a noise, and we don't know what that noise is. It's something that is so shocking that it leaves them altered. You have a nice line that there are two halves of everybody's stories: the half before the noise, and then the part of them after the noise. Why did you do that? Because obviously that, in a way, that refers back to an earlier sort of catastrophe novel, like you could say Neville Shoots on the Beach, where there's the nuclear disaster. It's not the slowly unfolding climate change disaster that's approaching us. Why did you make that decision to have, in a way, these two time frames implicitly inside the novel?
That is a very astute observation. And in part, it is because the slow drip of climate change is not a dramatic story. When Venice sinks beneath the sea, it is not going to do it all at once. It is going to do it centimeter by centimeter. It's going to slip away very slowly. And I don't know how you dramatize that on the page. The idea of the noise felt so unsettling to me because noise is very difficult to describe, and it's very abstract. It's an immediate thing, but then it's over. And there's no real clarity about where it's come from or what's exactly happened. And it just happens inside of the book. And then everyone is sort of puzzled about what has just transpired, and they're waiting for it to happen again. And then it does happen again. And it just gives the reader and the characters something a little more tangible to react to, a little more specific horror in the book.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is connected with this is, and one of the sort of chief points of horror is that that technology has switched off, that they're no longer connected to a wider world. There's no internet. The kids, you get a little bit of that in that thing with the kids. They're worried about their phones, but actually they can't, they're worried about their phones, but they don't feel the tick burrowing into their legs.
Yes. I mean,
and there's a lot going on about information.
To me, that's the contemporary reality. All we care about is our phones. Our phones have our relationship to the phone, which is a very new one. It's a new piece of technology. It's something that has only existed for a very short time. It's existed for the entirety of my children's lives, but, not my own. And so we simply don't understand what that relationship is or is like. I mean, how many times have you felt your phone vibrate in your pocket and then realized it was a phantom vibration, or that your phone, I feel my phone vibrate in my pocket, and I don't even set it to vibrate. Like, it's never set that way. So it's my mind is doing something to me because I have this intimate relationship with this object. It's very, very strange. And in a moment of catastrophe, I think our first instinct is to reach for information. And one of the strange resonances of this particular book is that it is published into a moment of cultural catastrophe. We've all lived through a cultural catastrophe in the last year.
So it was published before the COVID pandemic.
it was, and I wrote it before, and it was an active imagination. But then, in fact, so much of what I wrote about the in this imaginative act turned out to be accurate, I think, because what happened in February and March of 2020, when my children's school closed, is we spent all of our time, my husband and I, poring over what information we had, and trying to figure out what you were supposed to do. We were trying to interpret because the state, I think, every state, I can't think of a single state that is an exception to this, failed in its responsibility to its citizens to say, here is what you do. The United States government told us not to wear masks to prevent a respiratory disease. We were told not to, which is in direct contradiction to what they later decided was the way. So you're sifting through all of this information, and the way that you're doing it is through your phone. The other thing that happened in the beginning of this book, we see the couple arrive on Long Island, and they go to the store and they go shopping, and we hear in detail about everything that Amanda buys in the grocery store. And what I have said in the months since talking about this book is those of us with the means, the first thing that we did in this moment of lockdown was go shopping. And I don't mean for food. Of course, we all need food for our families to survive. That's a given. We went on Amazon and bought free weights so we could work out at home. We bought Bluetooth headsets so we could take meetings on our computers. We bought standing desks. We bought treadmills. We bought Peloton bikes because we couldn't go to the gym. This is what we do. Our cultural response to anything is to buy. It's an extraordinary and it's a broken thing. And I think that we all know it. We all know it. I bought as much as anybody did.